So we're back with some more Cyberpunk action. This time it is the base consoles, and as I pre-warned in my previous video and on Twitter, this is going to get messy at points. Yes, Cyberpunk 2077 is an amazing game. It's rammed full of style, character, art, atmosphere, action. Yes, there's some issues, yes, there's some bugs, yes, there's some game-breaking bugs still, but a game this extensive, this flamboyant, this demanding in terms of hardware is always going to have that level. So the first thing I'll get out of the way, it's great that it's out on these nearly 8-year-old consoles now, and it's impressive what they've managed to get out of it. There's certainly more work they can do, there's more cuts they need to make, and certainly more refinement to run better on these consoles. However, fundamentally, it's still pretty impressive that you're getting to play it. But I will warn you, as I warned before, if you are able to wait, because right now these are borderline unplayable for a good portion of the title. The Xbox One S is the worst, the PS4 is not much better, and generally there's too many consistent performance issues and some visual ones that can hinder the enjoyment and certainly nullify a lot of the impact the game actually makes in terms of its atmosphere, its world building, its character development. All of that can be impacted quite severely by some of the issues and bugs in the title. All versions can, even the top end PC version. Here's a quick glimpse of just what it looks like on that particular piece of hardware. We'll be covering it very, very soon, but just like on consoles, it's very demanding on PC, so don't think you can pick this up if you're running something like a 2060 or a 1080. 2070, 2080s are going to make sacrifices here. 2080 Ti's. So it's a game that demands a lot. You can see here on the PC the performance levels. Just 1080 maximum is sub 30 FPS on the 2070 overclocked. It's asking a lot of the hardware, and that's great. That's absolutely great because it means that it will scale well and it'll be a great benchmarking title for new GPUs. And I'll be covering it in my GPUs and my PC performance analysis going forward. But here we're going to talk about those consoles, those base consoles, and like I say, I feel a song coming on.
The base has arrived. Here we go again.
So yes, performance is low. The base consoles really struggle with this game, and that's not a surprise at all. It's a very demanding title in terms of what it's doing, and it's very GPU and memory hungry at all times. It's streaming a lot of assets, it's using CPU at certain key points in the title, and generally it's a game designed around PC first and foremost and then ported over to consoles. Don't get me wrong, that means it runs really bad on PC as well. If you've got anything as old as the consoles, you're probably going to get an even worse experience by and large, because there's every other issue under the sun that's going to come along with those. So generally the consoles are a sub 30 FPS most of the time. What you see on screen now is the disc day one version. Now it tears on the Xbox One S. It's an adaptive VSync. It tears at the top section very occasionally. When it's usually going to tear it usually drops a frame as well. Sometimes it can tear and not drop a frame, but as you can see here, if you're doing anything productive in the title in terms of driving, shooting, talking to people, anything that involves you actually moving around in a meaningful way, then generally you are sub 30. You are into 50 milliseconds, 66 milliseconds, and it can go even worse. The stuttering and juddering happens on all formats. That even PC gets it when you auto save, auto load, all that kind of areas are still cause issues. There's loads of bugs in terms of the game, memory management, context switching, cache misses, all that kind of good stuff. You can see generally where things just judder as things load in and things that happen at certain points in key areas and assets are streamed in to RAM. All of that allocation, memalloc, all of that is causing issues across the board on every format. And obviously the worse the hardware, the more it's affected, and therefore the Xbox One S and the PS4 suffer the worst of all of them. This is the disc one version. Like I say, it doesn't run great. Its average is 24 FPS, and then I tested all this stuff again on patch 102, which has a minor improvement. It's very, very small, but it does take away some of the effects, so it reduces some of the shadow casting light sources in the game. I've noticed that happened on every version as well, including PC. It does also reduce the TAA. It's less aggressive, there's less dithering. You can see a lot of trails in the older footage, the disc version, as you drive on the road. Look at the back of the car. I'll flash back to it now quickly. Look at the rear of the car. You can see that trail on the ground and the tarmac, and then you go to 102 and that's kind of gone now. It's much smoother and cleaner because you don't get as many trails of the TAA samples dragging back the image. So they've cleaned that up and that looks a lot better. It reduces some of the shading even more, so you've got some very, very dithered shading in the Xbox One S, far worse than all of them. That's what really stands out to me, because the game looks very grainy at all times. You can see here with the screen space reflections and then the GI bouncing of the light sources outside, it kind of uses that screen space, uses screen space effect a lot actually. It uses screen space shadows, screen space lighting, screen space reflections. So a lot of that is dithered to reduce the shading cost, in terms of that's the most expensive part of doing the frame. And you can see here as I move the camera up and down for the screen space reflections, or outside with the light bounce, or just the standard GI bounce inside buildings on the top of the wall or the ceiling, it just looks very, very dithered. This shot here is perfect. Look at me go into this tunnel. When you pause the game, look at how dithered that looks. And generally that's where the Xbox One suffers the most. Image quality is very poor. You have to turn off everything. So turn off chromatic aberration, turn off film grain, turn off motion blur, because the game is too poor a frame rate to run any kind of per object motion blur, and it can make the game look worse. You can get away with it slightly more on the PS4. Some of the shots here I had it turned on to test it, but generally I still leave it off on the PS4 because that performs just as bad. At some points it's even worse. The patch 104 certainly, it helps improve the Xbox One. Again, just like The Witcher 3 when I covered it back then, I feel like the Xbox is just one patch version ahead, not in terms of where they are, in terms of the development schedule. They're patching equal across all formats. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the team are better suited, more used to and more familiar with DirectX 12, DirectX 11, so therefore they're working on those areas first, and then still obviously moving over to the PlayStation. They got much better over the period of The Witcher 3's launch, and the same thing will happen here. They'll just have to make the changes in the engine to suit the hardware and suit the APIs of the PS4, and I think that's what's going to come, and generally they'll just tweak, optimise and improve the overall performance on console, and obviously PC at the same time, and just generally improve the engine. I really wish they hadn't not sent out review code, not allowed people to show the game when they reviewed it, only B-roll footage. The writing was on the wall there. Everyone kind of knew what was going on, so that's a faux pas there.
And him!
Gas is still problem. Clean it up, clean it out. Don't want to be bringing the target out under fire. Definitely don't want a slug in your back.
Violence continues to plague the Badlands. Shootings have been among
What a fat ass.
Starting from the disc version, it was bad on all of them. There was too many bugs, too many issues to really to use that as a productive version. Then 102 did improve a few things. It removed a few things, but like I say, it improved the performance. And then 104 is the best on the Xbox One S, and it's not quite as good on the PS4, but it's getting there. This shootout pretty much locked now on the PS4 in terms of the shootout at 30 FPS. A few dips at the end when you blow the wall down, but it can dip. Like I say, you just saw that heavily on the Xbox One S as well. And then moving over to the 104 version across both machines, you're generally seeing the Xbox One S is marginally better in certain places, marginally worse in others, but overall the Xbox One just comes out on top now. It just beats the PS4 in terms of performance. It didn't at the start. The disc 1 version was really bad as well. The performance was horrendous. They've definitely improved and worked on it, and like I say, I think the next patch will bring the PS4 back to where the Xbox One S is, and then it will kind of flip-flop back and forth as we go through until we get to that point, that harmonious 1.10 patch that we had on Witcher 3, where all the issues went away, the double buffer VSync issues, which this game is double buffered, so you still get these drops, those hangs into 20 FPS because it runs out of RAM, it runs out of performance, it can't flip another frame, so it has to wait and hang around, and that's a memory allocation issue because there's none left, or that's what they've done with the engine in terms of input times, so that slows down the input, and generally the Xbox One S struggles in most areas. It's sub 30 FPS, and the PS4, at least you can walk around certain areas, have certain combats, lower levels where it doesn't dip under 30 as often. The Xbox One S is never at 30 in my opinion, unless you look at the sky. It never hits it. It's consistently dropping frames and having minor tears, and this shootout on rail section with the gun is a good example of it, where it can feel really, really bad on all versions, on all formats. And then you get out and work through Tin Can Alley, the whole Tin Can Alley I covered last time. It's very, very bad. It feels bad. 200, 300 millisecond hangs on both consoles. Streaming, saving, loading, glitching, bugging. It just feels really, really bad to play. Controls are very hard because the control input time's all over the place. So you can have points where you press the D-pad to try and get to the outside view. It doesn't work. You see, you've got input polling issues being missed, or the IRQs being skipped. I don't know what's going on. There's literally points in the frame where you can't get the game to take your inputs on time. I did do some input times. They're all over the place, massively over the place. I'm not even going to quote them. It's not a great input performance title in terms of consoles, but that's not really a surprise because performance is, again, like a seesaw. It's up and down like a yo-yo. So there's not really a lot you can say here in terms of the fact that it's impressive that it is running. It looks great. The atmosphere is still there. The look of the title's still there. But it's hindered too much. It feels like Far Cry 3 in terms of the intro sequence. That incredibly impressive, I must admit, going back to the intro. The fact that they've rendered all of that section in real time and they just jump between all these different shots like it's a pre-rendered movie is massively impressive. That whole intro sequence blew me away in terms of what they do. Yes, there's some pop-in, yes, there's some loading, yes, there's some texture and models being streamed in badly at certain points. But take into account what they're doing, they are jumping between sections which we'd normally think would be a pre-rendered movie, and there's no pop into physics, there's no glitching, there's no jumps, it's just really asset streaming in. It's very, very great tech, and there's no SSD in use at all there. It runs exactly on the Xbox One S as it does on the PS4. So again, like I say, the technology here in terms of the uses on PC, the ray tracing, the lighting, the physically based rendering, and the material quality here, the overall consistency of the world, the look. Obviously, it's a very 80s inspired futuristic look. It's got its tongue in its cheek. It's RoboCop in many ways in terms of his extreme areas of coverage. But here, this is this test when jumping in and out, going down Tin Can Alley. Like I say, the performance is just dire. It feels horrible to play, and this is where you can't get away from it. Games are for playing. You can get away with cutscenes that run like this because you're just watching them, but generally in this is the worst section I've found so far. There's nothing worse than this. That's why I'm going to keep using it. Like I say, it's a new Novigrad. Tin Can Alley, it's sub 20 FPS generally all the time, stuttering, juddering, 200, 300, 400 millisecond skips at points when it auto saves. It just feels bad. The lighting's heavily sacrificed, the shading quality on the left hand side on the Xbox One S, but the dynamic time of day makes an impact as well. So they've definitely made sacrifices in the right area. They've cut back on some of the screen space reflections you can see on the Xbox One. They've cut back some of the shading. So that's coming to PS4. It has to come because that's what they need to do. And this is 104 on both sides. So this is what I mean by the saying that it's always seems to be one version ahead. Even though they're equal patches, they're one step ahead on the Xbox and PC. So I'm sure some of these cutbacks are coming on the PS4 and it will improve performance, and they're quick wins. That's the right thing to do. Colour a lot of these characters, maybe cut it down to less than the lowest on PC. Whatever you need to do to just keep consistency, because like I say, you can see here the draw distance, the views into the horizon and beyond, the amount of density in the world, the alpha effects, the smoke, the lighting, the shadow casting, the shadow maps everywhere else, the screen space shadows, everything draws in much closer on these consoles. But overall it's incredibly impressive in what it's doing, but it's doing too much, clearly, because the performance takes a hit, and therefore you can't really enjoy the game because it just feels so inconsistent to play. If this was my only means of playing it, I'd park it and play it later once it's patched, or get it on the next gen consoles and PC where you've got options. It can run much better. You can see here the shadow maps drawing in feet right in front of the car on the Xbox One S, and they're much further out. So these are the kind of sacrifices that are coming in the next patch for PS4. So 105 will probably match what we're seeing on Xbox One S, but it's still not enough. But then some will play it. People played Far Cry, and I couldn't handle it on the 360 without tearing. At least it doesn't tear at that level. That's one of the benefits. And there's other titles. I grew up, playing games from the C64 Spectrum Acorn, so I'm well aware of badly performing games. I was there at the start of 3D, so I've played on the Amiga, the ST, PC, 2-3 FPS, loving it. You were happy. You were happy when you had 5 for FPS. I've covered that on my Amiga analysis. And in fact, this game, in the start of it, when you're on the Nomad choice, takes me right back to the Amiga days, and that's where I think this game came from. This game came from the desert.
Unchanged for millions of years, yet witness to a biblical prophecy come true that one day the meek shall inherit the earth.
crazy random reference aside, like I say, it's an amazing game that has some serious issues on these consoles, and that means by and large I just can't recommend that you buy it for these because it's not an enjoyable experience. One thing I will mention is, like I say, there's this dynamic resolution scale. It's quite aggressive. You see here on the PS4, but it does it on all versions. When I zoom in, you can see that it's just standing still. It's randomly scaling. Look at the trees, the bushes, the floor, the blurriness coming back and forth, back and forth. It really made my eyes go funny. I thought for a minute there I'd been drinking too heavily. But it's a great shame because it takes the edge off what is an incredible piece of work from CG Projekt Red, and I really want to cover it in much more positive detail. There's many good things to talk about in this game, but for right now, the base consoles just can't run this game, and I can't recommend it. But that's it for now. I am out. If you like this or anything else I do, please like, share and subscribe, because I am independent and it really helps. Anyway, I'll catch you very soon on the next one.
Lights out for a minute, all right?